Welcome into the Sooner Tailgate Show. My name is Jason Ray. This is our sixth rendition of our Sooner Tailgate Show over here on Fridays. I hope you guys got an opportunity to join for the last hour with Mark Rogers and John Hoover over at All Sooners. Really, really good stuff. I was able to catch just a little bit of it. I'll go back and watch the majority of it later on, when I get a chance this afternoon. But welcome in. We are 3 weeks away from Oklahoma Sooners kicking off against Arkansas State. 2 weeks away from college football in any capacity. We've got NFL preseason exhibition stuff going on. High school stuff's about to get cranked up very soon. So it is the best time of the year. Even if you're a softball fan, you got fall ball starting here pretty soon as well. So whatever your sport is, if you're more inclined on the high school side, you've got, like I said, we got that going on. We'll get into some of that as we get closer these next couple of weeks, but got a lot to talk about as always this time of the year. There's a lot of fall camp intel that we'll get to, some recruiting updates that Oklahoma doesn't have a ton, but they've got some big names coming up here in the month of August and then early September as well from a commitment standpoint that Oklahoma's looking at. And then you've certainly got all of the games coming up and certainly the season and kind of the trajectory of what that looks like. So also any questions, comments you have, any specific position group, any player, any recruit that you want to talk about, feel free to bring them up on here on the chat, and we will discuss that. It's getting, like I said, it's getting close. I think Oklahoma's going to have their first major scrimmage of the fall tomorrow. We'll get some notes on that. I'll be able to provide that next week as well to you guys. So just a couple of items here. Make sure you guys follow me on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at JasonRay1. I know that Mark had to do this earlier today, but make sure you join him live 11:30 a.m. every Wednesday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. I think he's going to start having different guests. I might be on there, kind of depending on timing from time to time, but a lot of good stuff that will go on. And then, as I mentioned, just 3 short weeks away, we will continue to do the Oklahoma Post Game live at the Voice of College Football here every single Saturday after the games. Obviously, we will do kind of our pregame before on Friday. So lots of good stuff, lots of exciting stuff to get to and talk through. So yeah, let's kind of start with some of if there's any questions, and then I'll kind of go into some of the recruiting stuff where I think Oklahoma's at. Obviously, I think the one that's absolutely near and dear to everyone's heart is the commitment and potential announcement for Williams Nwaneri on the 14th. But anything else, we'll certainly get to that as well. Jimmy, thanks for joining. Phil, Jimmy, how are we looking on the O-line? So here's what I know on the offensive line. I think your starters are pretty much solidified, right? I think you're going to have Walter Rouse at one tackle, and then you're going to have Tyler Guyton at the other. I think you've got Rain, who's pretty much solidified himself as the starting center. And then you've probably got Savion Byrd and McCade Mattower. I think Mattower is certainly there. I think there's been a little bit of a battle at guard right there between really, I think Byrd is, from what I've understood, kind of solidified himself. I think the main concern for Byrd coming in was really kind of where his weight was. I think he's hovering around the 300 mark, maybe a little bit less than 300 at this point. So I don't know that 290, 295 is really where he's going to be at, or where he needs to be at in terms of the season. So I think that's there. That's there. No, I think there's maybe a little bit of concern about depth, right? What does that depth look like? I think it's going to be really key for Jacob Sexton to get back. And I think the one thing, I think they're not to say that completely they're handling him with kid gloves, but I think to a certain degree they want to make sure, because he's well ahead of schedule from his ACL tear that he suffered in the bowl game last year. So I think they want to bring him back slowly, but at the same time, I think they want to have him as part of this team. Now the depth is kind of interesting to see what that looks like. Caleb Schaefer, transfer from that came over in the offseason from Miami, Ohio, I believe. I think he's a guy that was really, really heavy, big guy, 340, 350 range. I think they've got him to a little bit of a better, to a better situation, just in terms of what that weight looks like. I think he is going to be someone that is certainly a factor in terms from a depth perspective. Caden Green, true freshman out of Lee Summit, ironically enough, the same high school from Williamson and Winery. I think he's gonna be a guy that's gonna play. Listening a little bit about Gabe talking about him, is he's a guy maybe needs to turn up the mean streak just a little bit, just in terms of what that looks like and him being able to play. So I think you got that. I think you've got a couple of other guys, that are going to play. Certainly that are going to provide some impact from a reserve perspective, but I think you really like what you've seen out of fall camp early on, and I think the fact that you've got these top 5 guys that are pretty solidified in terms of who the belief is that's going to start at those certain positions, that works out well, in what you look for. Excuse me. Weston, thanks for jumping in. Who's starting at linebacker other than Stutzman? So I think one of the early returns from Paul Camp has been around Jaron Kanek and just how fluid he is, how well he's doing, how he's picked up the position, the things that he's done through the offseason, just a lot more comfortable at the position. So I think you'll see him as one of the other linebackers there with Stutzman. And I think you've got some competition there. I think the one thing that's really, really big, and the thing that I think a lot of you guys have heard, and I've said too, that the fact that there's a lot more competitive depth up and down the lineup, up and down the roster, definitely, but specifically at linebacker with this conversation, I think you've got, kind of depending on how Oklahoma lines up, if it's more kind of a nickel or dime situation, only a couple backers on the field, if you've got a guy like Deshaun McCullough that will enter big time just into the depth and really what that looks like. So I like McCullough, I like Kanek, and I like Stutzman to be our starting linebackers at this point. So we'll get into the recruiting here in just a minute. We've got a couple of comments, and Weston, I believe Bird will be the starting guard. Yeah, there's a little, like I said, there's a little bit of a competition there. Maybe a little bit of competition with Troy Everett and Rame at center, but I think Rame's pretty much got that job solidified. So you've got Bird probably competing with Caleb Schaefer a little competition with Caden Green as well, and kind of mixing and matching some of those guys. But at this point, from everything that I've heard, I would be surprised if Bird's not your starting guard. I think the one thing when he played a little bit this year, particularly in the bowl game when he played a lot, I think the thing that you're worried about with Bird is kind of keeping that mentality throughout the game that he starts with. I think just in terms of running out of steam, so to speak. So let's talk a little bit about a little recruiting. Then, if you guys have anyone specifically that you want to certainly to discuss from a recruiting standpoint, let's talk through that. So, first and foremost, let's talk about Winery making his commitment announcement on the 14th. So this one's been wild, as you would expect from one of the top players in the country. I think at one point on 3 top number 1 overall. Anywhere you go, he's anywhere between number 3 and number 5 overall in the country. This one's been, I don't know that I would say back and forth, because I think Oklahoma has been really, really prevalent in his recruitment for quite some time, even going back to last year. But it seemed to kind of settle between Oklahoma and Missouri. Georgia's in it to a certain degree, but I don't know that they're really in it. Right. But I think there's been a little bit of a storm that Missouri has created over the last couple of weeks, really. Honestly, just an astronomical NIL deal that they're offering And this is kind of Mizzou's MO over the last few years. They have the ability to go all in on a couple of recruits, and hopefully, and for their perspective, Luther Burden's another one to kind of think through on that one. But I think Oklahoma's weathered the storm. From everything that I've heard, and of course these things change on a dime. I mean, you just have to go back to David Hicks last year, but Oklahoma's in a really good spot. I think they have solidified over the last couple of days. I think they've solidified their position with Nwaneri. I think in one of these things, and Parker Thune said this so eloquently, and not to steal his thunder, but I want to give him credit. And this is very, very well said, that if you're a top 5 player, number 1 overall player, whatever that is, you're going to get paid handsomely. And so I think it comes down to a certain degree of what you're looking for outside of an NIL deal. I think, whether it's relationships, whether it's the ability to get to the next level, whether it's what those coaches look like, that you're going to be playing for, and maybe what does the talent around you look like, right? And so I think the relationship with Miguel Chavis and Todd Bates has and will continue to be fruitful. And whatever happens, I believe right now, I'm pretty confident that I think OU is going to get the commitment on Monday from Nwaneri, but I do believe that it's something that's going to continue to be a recruitment up until you see pen to paper. Like I said, things can change. Like I said, I think Oklahoma has weathered the storm. He has not visited Missouri over the last week or so. So I think that's a sign that Oklahoma's in a good spot. And like I said, like where Oklahoma's at, this would be if Oklahoma's able to get in one area. It's one of the bigger recruitments that they have had in a while. So anyways, if Oklahoma's able to get him, it's not the end, but I think it's a great step in the right direction in terms of some of the other guys that Oklahoma's getting. And then you look at David Stone as another guy, August 26th. Again, there's not really anything that's changed with him. He plays the game. I still think Oklahoma's in a great spot for him. Nigel Smith, September 8th commitment, another big time defensive lineman recruit. He's probably one that has been more of an Oklahoma solidified, I'm not going to say target, but felt better about him than really anyone else. So I think Oklahoma's still in a very, very good spot. If I had to lay money on the likelihood of any of the 3 that we'd mentioned, I probably would go Nigel Smith at 95, 97%. Probably would go Nwaneri 70 to 75% at this point, and David Stone probably in the 80% range. So when you kind of take a step back and you look at that, that could be as big of a haul that Oklahoma has had in quite some time at the position on the defensive side of the ball, just generally speaking, but very specifically on the defensive line. And so kind of going through some of the other guys there, Dominic McKinley, Oklahoma is very much in the conversation there. I don't know that I would say that Oklahoma leads for him. I probably would give the slight edge to Texas at this point for McKinley, but Oklahoma is very much in the conversation, and it does indeed look like it's an Oklahoma and Texas battle. For McKinley, there's a question in here about Okoye. I think there's been a lot of inroads made between Oklahoma and Okoye over the last month. So this one's one that's probably going to keep going through the winter and through early. At the very least, late fall. I think Oklahoma gets him in on some visits. I think it's a good sign. I think it's very key on that recruitment for Oklahoma to have a solid year this year on the field for Oklahoma to land him. But I think there's some inroads, and I think there's a lot of positive momentum for Okoye. Alabama's in the mix. I think a lot of people are in the mix as well. I think Yeah, I think there's a comment here about Alabama. Yeah, I think he went to Alabama's camp over the summer, showed out, was really really big time, performed very very well. So he's got Alabama there, in that one. So just a couple of other guys that I think would be interesting to kind of to talk through and understand. Grant Bricks, offensive lineman out of Logan, Iowa. I think that one's one to watch for. I think Oklahoma is in a really is a better spot than they've been, at some time with him. But I do think if he's somebody that they can get committed before the start of the season, I think that would be a a good sign that he's going to commit to Oklahoma. Now, if this goes into the season and there's a couple of officials, I think you could see that. Not that Oklahoma would be out of it by any means, but I think you could lean towards maybe a little bit more momentum for Kansas State and Nebraska, because I think the simple fact is, he's the distance in getting to an Oklahoma game for an OV is a little bit more hectic than it would be um, to get to Nebraska or Kansas State. For something like that. Just Eli Bowen came out the other day and had mentioned Oklahoma and Texas as his top two. Again, would be very surprised if that's not Oklahoma with Peyton Bowen in the fold. 3-star defensive back Devon Jordan out of Tulsa Union. I think he's another guy to keep an eye on. And so a lot of these guys haven't made a decision in terms of what their date is going to be at this point. So, yeah, I mean, I think overall Oklahoma's in a really, really good spot. There's probably about, I think right now, 10 to 12 guys that Oklahoma still that you want to watch for in terms of what this could look like. In terms of a complete recruiting class right now, Oklahoma ranks number 14 overall. They get some of these big time guys completely. I think Oklahoma has a good opportunity there to get a top 2 or 3 class this year, if some of those guys end up committing to Oklahoma. Boganowski, yeah, I think good. He was one of those that I had on my list as well, Jimmy. I think it's a little bit one of those situations where it seems like Boganowski's slow playing Oklahoma a little bit. And Oklahoma doesn't have a lot of commitments right now at the safety position, but I think that's another one very much like the Bricks commitment, our recruitment, Jimmy. If we don't hear anything about Boganowski, I would say early to mid September. I think you'll probably see Oklahoma probably throwing some offers over to some other safeties. Without a doubt. And then we'll kind of go from there. Just so you guys know, in the comments, I've removed fail BV. I can get on board with some of the comments going back and forth, but when it's 100% complete negative, I have no interest in it whatsoever. So Lori, yeah, you're absolutely. Oklahoma is very much. I don't know if you caught my percentages, Lori, but I still would put him in the 80% range in terms of coming to Oklahoma. Yeah, absolutely. Linebacker, yeah, I think I misspoke. Boganowski's a linebacker. You're right. Jackson, thanks for joining the Boomer Sooner. And so if there's no other discussions about specifically about any kind of recruitments or what that looks like, hopefully Oklahoma has a good week next week with on Monday and see what that looks like. But let's talk through. Let's get some fall camp fall camp discussion. And then Jackson, I've got your question here um, about the schedule. We'll get to that. That's another thing that I wanted to get to and kind of talk about the what that 2024 schedule looks like there for Oklahoma now that's solidified this morning with the additions of Houston and Maine. So, like I said in the comments, if there's a specific position group or more specifically a specific player that you're interested in, and so and I take this so I'll just preface this before kind of talking about some of the fall camp intel. Remember, so this is from what I've been hearing from people that have watched practice. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to be able to go watch practice, but this is from a lot of people that different intel, and so I think there's certain players, obviously, at certain positions that will pop out to some people and pop out to others. Um, so I just want to make sure that I preface that before saying I've heard a lot of different good things about different positions. So I'll go through those from kind of top to bottom on both sides of the ball, and feel free if there's anyone here, we'll get to that as well. So quarterback position, no surprise, Jackson Arlen and Dylan Gabriel have separated themselves to a large degree from the rest of the pack. DG is going to be your starter. Jackson Arnold is going to be your backup. I don't think there was really any thoughts that would be any different than that. But possibly, you never know once the pads get on and once you get into practice. But those are going to be 1A and 1B, or 1 and 2. There's no necessarily competition or controversy, really as far as that goes. But I think it's good to know, and I think one thing that we've said on here, I think it provides the ability for Oklahoma to be a little bit more creative in terms of how often they run DG this year. I know that they held off on that a little bit, specifically after he got injured last year with what they knew that they had from a depth perspective. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about what DG can do, and excited to see what his improvement is from year 1 to year 2 at Oklahoma. Right. I know that there's some things very specifically that he needs to improve on third and fourth down efficiency, just generally speaking, holding the ball a little too long, really just sometimes some inaccurate throws down the middle of the field. So I think those are some of the things that you look at early on for Oklahoma, and specifically for him to be able to improve on. So moving on to the running back position, I think there's a little bit of a surprise here as it started in spring and it's continued to kind of manifest itself here through the fall camp. Is Caleb Hicks has really solidified himself as a guy that is going to be able to play this year. He's going to be able to be really difficult to keep off the field. No, I think your first two backs are obviously going to be Sawchuk and Barnes, but I think Hicks has put himself in a position to be in that, being a real good competition with Marcus Major on what that looks like in terms of the third down back or your third guy on the depth chart. Right. So I think that the depth at running back is really solid. I think if you're Oklahoma specifically, you like what you have in terms of, if you think you've probably got 4 or 5 guys that you feel comfortable with, that you could go with, that could get some carries for you and feel comfortable with. So I think this is the deepest running back group that Oklahoma has had in quite some time. And so, and I think the other thing that to mention was Dylan Smothers was a guy that, there were some rumors out there that he'd potentially had left the team, had been kicked off. From what I've understood, that he's back at practice today. So I don't think, I don't know the situation, and certainly would let the University of Oklahoma kind of speak to exactly what has transpired there, and I'm sure that he's back. They probably won't mention it, but I think there has obviously some concern with him. They like what they have on the upside for him. I think he's probably he's certainly a redshirt candidate for my eyes this year. But I think absolutely he's someone that Oklahoma's looking at that could be a big time player for them moving forward. So now let's kind of go to the tight ends and the wide receivers. First on the tight ends, I think the tight end position is probably certainly the thinnest and probably the most concerning position, maybe right now that I would have on the entire team. I think when you look at you've got a guy in Austin Stogner who has obviously I think Oklahoma knows what they have in Stogner. He's probably not as fast and as electric as he was early on in his career. He suffered a few injuries and things like that, but I think I think he's sufficient for that tight end position for Oklahoma. Now behind him, you just don't have a lot of guys that are, I would say, probably Oklahoma level tight ends. They've brought in Blake Smith from Texas A&M. I think he's probably more of a blocking tight end, and you've got a couple of kids that are in their second year at Oklahoma that have been a little bit injured, and Jason Llewellyn, as well as the name is automatically just escaping me. Someone will tell me. The other sophomore tight end this year that was a little bit injured. So I think that'll be interesting position just in terms of what that looks like from a depth perspective. But I think it's very, very key, very crucial that Stogner remains healthy. And then when you go to the wide receiver position, I think you've got about. I think Levy had talked about he wanted to really have a really a 6-person rotation to be able to, to do the things that they want to do and be successful. So this is a position more than any that I kind of hear different names each day. And so I think it'll be interesting to see which of these names kind of manifest themselves in terms of guys that Levy feels comfortable that they can count on, in terms of being able to block, being able to battle, route running, all that good stuff. I think you've got a couple of quote unquote household names that you expect to be in the mix and will certainly be starters. And when you look at Jalil Farouk and Drake Stoops, like those are two guys that you can pencil in that they are going to be starters. Now after that, you've got like a really big log jam on certain guys that I've heard a couple of good things about, and certain guys that still they have the opportunity to step up. I know that BV has sung the praises of Gavin Freeman. He's a guy that's prime for a lot more playing time. I've heard the name Nick Anderson a couple of times that has really showed out. I saw LV Bunkley Shelton mentioned as well. Gabe had mentioned a little bit about Jaden Gibson, really kind of embracing the blocking role and just what it means to be a big time receiver. I think the biggest the one name that I continue to hear over and over and over again that has a big opportunity that would be surprised if he's either not in a starting role or playing a ton is Jacoy's Pettaway. I know he will be a true freshman this year, but they've got a trio of guys with Pettaway, Andrell Anthony, and Brendan Thompson, the transfer from Texas, that does have the opportunity, to kind of take the top off the defense from that perspective. But I think those are the guys that I continue to see, from a wide receiver perspective that have kind of stood out specifically. Andrell Anthony a little bit earlier in camp, Pettaway kind of consistently. Recently, more kind of Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson and sprinkled in with Bunkley Shelton as well. So that'll be interesting to see. Like I said, you've got about 8 or 9 guys, vying for that. But I think, whether or not Oklahoma has a a CeeDee Lamb or a Ryan Broyles or a big time alpha receiver like a Marvin Mims. But I think you've got enough. I think you've got enough guys there that hopefully will be solid enough. You have the opportunity to take the top off the defense with some of these big play, very, very quick receivers. So, Lori, how long before Jackson comes in and takes over? How long do we give DG? I think, Lori, it kind of depends. Obviously, it kind of depends on what this looks like from a scheduling perspective, win loss and things like that. So, if Oklahoma obviously loses, but even really struggles to a large degree in these non-conference games, I think obviously that's going to be a bad sign. Now SMU, I mean, I think they could probably provide some opposition, I think, in terms of how good their offense has been and could be. But I think defensively, when you look at Arkansas State, when you look at Tulsa, and then you look at SMU, all three of those teams are very below average defensive teams. So if we're seeing some struggles out of DG there, then I think that might be a little bit of a warning flag. But I mean, there's precedents for this, right? Not only at OU, but some other places where some of these true freshmen maybe aren't ready to start initially, but get an opportunity, mid-season. If you see Jackson Arnold play, I think he's playing because either an injury has happened or obviously something has gone wrong with DG in some way or the other. So I hope for his sake, I hope we don't see that. I hope Jackson gets the opportunity to get in a few games and play, whether it be packages or whatever that looks like, and have him primed to be the guy, in 2024. So, but I don't really think that would, that you would see that. Yeah, Eric, I think you're talking about, I think this was in relation to, who's kind of shown out a wide receiver. Nick Anderson is one there. Jimmy, thanks for that. Doug, what about, I really haven't heard anything much from Jacoby Johnson. I think he's a guy that Oklahoma is so loaded on the defensive side from a depth perspective. I think he's probably a redshirt candidate, but certainly they're excited about him and his speed, what he could bring to the table. See, we will probably play JQB because we're leading maybe a fourth. Yeah, I think that's what you hope for if you get a big lead, particularly early on in some of these games, in terms of what that looks like. And so now let's kind of move over to the defensive side of the ball. I think the one thing that you want to remark at is the size difference in some of these kids. It's not almost night and day from what it was last year. I think the depth is the competitive balance. Again, there's that word, but the depth that Oklahoma has on the defensive side of the ball. Now, you take that with a grain of salt to know that this was one of the worst defenses in the country a year ago, statistically speaking. But they did have moments later in the year where they actually performed a little bit better. But I think having that depth will help being able to perform a little bit better in the fourth quarter. As far as that goes, so really kind of looking at some of the guys let's kind of looking inside from a defensive tackle perspective. I think Dejon Terry has been a guy that has been pleasantly surprising, not really surprising, but I think even better than advertised coming over from Tennessee. I think he is a guy that you're going to absolutely see as a starter in the interior of that defensive line. And Jonah Lualua is another guy that has obviously, if you read the tea leaves a little bit on him, with him coming into Big 12 Media Day, that kind of lends that to the belief that certainly he's going to be a big factor on the defensive line and really be able to play a lot. I think Jordan Kelly has shown flashes and has really, really stepped up his game inside as well. Isaiah Coe is going to be there. I think you've got that. I think you've got that. Those guys. That's probably your top four at this point. And then you've got Kelvin Gilliam, Grayson Halton, as guys that will be able to kind of provide depth there as well. Then when you look at some of the ends, I think kind of Rondell Bothroyd is the guy that you know probably doesn't look the best, but I think he's going to be the one that's going to perform the best. And when I say look the best, in terms of you go look at his kind of physical stature compared to some of the others on the team, and he's not going to be someone that's going to wow you, but he's played so much. He is very technically sound. He knows where to be. He knows what to do, and so I think you like where you're at. You've got Rondell Bothroyd, you've got Ethan Downs. What has Reggie Grimes been able to do? But I think Ethan Downs and Bothroyd are the two that you hear a lot about. I heard some really good things about Trace Ford. I think he's a guy that will be very situational for Oklahoma as a pass really as kind of a pass rusher. Kind of the same thing with R. Mason Thomas. He was recently in a boot, but I don't think that's anything to be concerned about. But he was performing really, really well in practice. And Ethan Downs is a little bit down just in terms of his weight, but I think he's still kind of got some of that strength and being able to move a little bit better than maybe he was last year, as far as like kind of how he's able to work those zone reads and things like that. So PJ Adebari is a guy that, still is obviously, as you would expect as a true freshman, thinking, but when he's able to go in there and just play and not really kind of think of what his keys and reads are, I think he's very, very successful. So I think he's a guy that is going to be on the field. He's an athletic freak. He's got the measurables that no one has at that position for Oklahoma. So I think you're going to see him play some as the season goes forward. I think you'll see him get more and more time as he gets more accustomed to the defense. And I think that they'll put him in positions where he can be successful. Just put his hand in the ground and go rush the passer or go rush the passer. I think that's what you'll see from time to time, at least early on. But I think he has an opportunity to play some, but we'll see how he continues to understand the defense, how he continues to play, especially when a scrimmage situation. Drills are different than an actual game and scrimmage situation, and will be interesting to see, kind of what that looks like. And then you move to the linebacker position. As I mentioned, I've talked a little bit about Jaron Kanek. Brent is he's so difficult and hard on those linebackers. I mean, it's hard to tell. Obviously tons of pub for Stutzman that he's been doing really well. But Kanek is another guy that's been singled out that I've heard that is playing at a high level early on this year. And then Randy, you got a question here about the cornerback and safety secondaries overall. I think you've got a lot of good competition at the cornerback position. A lot of young kids are going to be there, being able to play. Obviously, at one corner, Woody Washington pretty much has that one, locked down. Would be surprised if something else happened outside of having Woody at that spot. But I think on the opposite side, there's some fairly good competition there. Gentry Williams, Josiah Wagner are probably your two top candidates there. Probably would be a little bit surprised if Gentry Williams isn't your starter there. But I think Josiah Wagner is going to play, and they love what they see out of him. He's one guy that continues to be a guy that's really talked about a lot. And then the safeties. I think the safeties probably, Randy, is the position group that I'm the most excited about, maybe even on the entire team, because I think this has right now, and of course this is a little bit of hopium here on August 11th, 3 weeks away from the first game, but I think the secondary has an opportunity to be the best secondary, particularly safety position that we've had here at Oklahoma in over 10 years. They are that good and they are that deep in the secondary position. I think you've got Billy Bowman and certainly Reggie Pearson, sorry, name escaped me. Is probably your two safeties at this point. I think it'll be interesting if Oklahoma goes nickel. What that looks like. I think you've got somebody like Peyton Bowen that could be there, but then you've got again Peyton Bowen's another guy that's going to be too good to keep off the field. Don't know if he ends up being a starter there. I think that mix and match will be interesting to see what that looks like for depending on the alignment and the defense that Oklahoma's in. If you're in a nickel position, do you move somebody like Key over to free safety or strong, and then you move Reggie Pearson is more of the nickel, or what does that look like? So I think there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching there. Justin Harrington seems to be kind of the leader in the clubhouse for Cheetah. I think he kind of depends on what that looks like. If it, I think he's the pass game Cheetah. When you look at more of kind of a run game Cheetah, you'll see Dasan McCullough in there as well. So overall, like I said, everything that I've heard so far is positive. I haven't heard a whole lot of negative. I think, Jimmy, to your point here, I think Connor Neer is a guy that great story. I don't know how much he'll be able to be impactful this year. I mean, it's just a big step up in competition when you go from Ferris State to Oklahoma. But I think it'll be interesting to see if he's able to kind of get in that too deep and what that looks like. And then how much do you think the defense will be improved? It's so hard to tell at this point. I to a certain degree, Jimmy, I'm going to reserve judgment until Big 12 season starts. I don't know. I mean, you're going to learn a little bit through fall camp. You'll learn a little bit more through, through the non-conference. SMU is going to provide a little bit of a test, but really not until Oklahoma gets in conference play, particularly Texas, but maybe Cincinnati a little bit before that. So I think this is, look, the influx and talent that Oklahoma was able to bring in through the transfer portal and through the recruiting classes last year and even the previous year to a certain degree. And then you've got as good of coaches that Oklahoma has on the defensive side of the ball in the second year in BV's system. I think you can't not be better, improved. Now, but how much is that improvement? What does that improvement look like? Right. I mean, I think you've got small victories that can be made. With the depth. Hopefully, that helps you as a complete unit to be able to be more. More prolific in the fourth quarters, late in the games, where Oklahoma struggled a little bit down the stretch sometimes. I mean, just look at the bowl game against Florida State. Couldn't stop Florida State in the fourth quarter on the defensive side of the ball. So yeah, I think that's going to be very intriguing to see. I think this. I would think right now, I think this can easily be a top 50 defensive team. And I know that we kind of think through that and think, man, top 50, is that really all that good? No, when you think about this team from a total defense perspective being in the 117, I believe, last year. And then when you look at this team being, scoring defense in the 90s, I think if you're in the 50s, that gets you to 9 wins off with this schedule. I think that is very doable for this team this year. And so I know that there was a question about schedule for 2024, but we've talked about this a lot. But this schedule, and I don't know how much you guys have kept track of the whole Iowa State situation. In terms of the betting scandal, they're losing players left and right. So, that was a game. Again, I mean, that's a Big 12 opponent that Oklahoma should beat, right? But again, that's another game that maybe not as tough as originally, even originally thought. So, I think getting off to a good start is paramount. I think this team should be undefeated going into Texas. You've got, and I can pull up the schedule. Unfortunately, I don't have it memorized just yet. But when you look at the schedule with Arkansas State, Tulsa, Arkansas State, SMU, then Tulsa, Cincinnati before Texas. I think that's it. I'm not sure. I can't remember if there's another Big 12 game in before that or not. But yeah, no, I think the schedule is going to set up very well for Oklahoma to be successful this year. And what does success look like? I know that a lot of times we as fans, when we look at success, like Oklahoma is one of those teams that has the opportunity, that we feel like that has opportunity to play for a championship every year. I'm sorry, Iowa State is the one game before Texas, and that's a home game. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're Oklahoma, you have to like your chances of being 5-0 going into Texas. And in fact, if you're not 5-0 going into Texas, I think it's got to be a little bit of a disappointment coming into what the expectations are for this year. So, and this is a team that very well has the opportunity. I think 9 to 10 wins is where they need to be. If Oklahoma comes in below, barring catastrophic injuries to key positions, if you're anything less than 9 wins, I think is a disappointment. If you're 9-3, you build off of that from a 6-7 going into the season, going into the SEC, right? But no, I mean, I think you've got teams, as we talked about, the first 5, and Texas is probably going to be the only game on the schedule that Oklahoma is not favored in. Oklahoma State's a little down. UCF, Oklahoma hosts UCF after Texas, after a bye week. You go to Kansas, that'll be tricky. They're a much improved team. And then you go to Oklahoma State. I think that's your biggest, the back half of the year. That's your, you have a 3-game stretch where you go to Kansas, go to Oklahoma State, host West Virginia, and then go to BYU. But still, having said that, this team, 9-3, 10-2 is kind of where I'm at right now, and what this team should be like, for sure. And so there's a couple of questions, or one question specifically looking at the schedule in 2024, as it's the inaugural season in the in the SEC for Oklahoma, and it was just announced today. Oklahoma had a couple of different teams that they've added to the schedule, right? So I think you've got Oklahoma already had Temple and Tulane, and they had to add a couple of conference or of non-conference opponents. So Houston has been added, and Maine has been added as well. So that gets you to, I think, for the first time in a long time, Oklahoma has 7 true home games, and then they have an 8th game against Texas, with only 4 true road games. And those are some pretty tough games when you go to Auburn, to LSU, to Missouri, and to Ole Miss. So I think that'll be interesting to see, how that schedule lines up. But then you've got Alabama and Tennessee at home as well, as kind of your tougher, your tougher conference games there. So I think the schedule sets up, I think, okay. It's not a murderer's row for Oklahoma's first season, but you've got the difference conference, the 8-game conference schedule, which caused Oklahoma to have to go grab a couple of different conferences, or different non-conference games, I should say. So will be interesting to see that as we move forward. So any other questions, comments? We're about at time. Don't really have much softball related. We talked a little bit last week about the addition of Kelly Maxwell for Oklahoma. Oklahoma made it official this week with all 4 transfers, 3 of which are graduate transfers. Is one was a freshman this year in Peyton Monticelli, but again, I think it will be interesting to watch to see what fall ball looks like for the softball side of things in terms of position battles, where that goes, what that looks like, and things like that. So, Jimmy, yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right, Jimmy. It is very brutal compared to what the schedule looks like, in terms of some of the teams that Oklahoma's playing. So, don't mean to think that it's not tough whatsoever, but you don't, you luckily you miss Georgia. I mean, Alabama's tough enough, but you miss Georgia. You don't play a Florida or something like that. But so, I mean, when you look at Missouri, South Carolina at home, and things like that. Who knows what Auburn looks like? That's a program that's a little bit in flux right now. Get to host Tennessee, which will be a very interesting game, a game as well. Yeah, I think it all depends, Randy, on what this season looks like for Oklahoma. I think if you go 9-3, 10-2, maybe you're in a NY6 bowl, just outside the playoff. You compete for a Big 12 championship. Maybe you win a Big 12 championship. I think that sets Oklahoma up to be in a much better spot, and particularly as we open the program today, talking about recruiting and things like that. Then you get some of these big time guys in. Then you start looking the part on the offense and defensive line. And so I think that will be interesting to see. So, all right, so we can kind of wrap it up for today. If there's any other late questions that you guys have, please feel free to send them here in the comment in the chat. But like I said, make sure you guys stay with us every Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. We will do this for the rest of the year, certainly during football season, and again after the season is over as well. This will be more of a pregame, and I think we'll do a lot of different things in terms of what look at some of the area high school games coming up for each weekend, looking at the Big 12 and national schedule, and then certainly obviously kind of doing a pregame for Oklahoma each week. And yeah, we'll get rocking and rolling with that. Like I said, we are three weeks away from tomorrow at 11 a.m. Kickoff for Arkansas State, and then 2 weeks away from week 0. I don't know if you guys are the same as me, but I don't even really care who plays in week 0. It's college football, so I'm excited. I'm going to be glued to it as well. I think you guys will. I'll tell you this quick story to appreciate this. I have, I think, like most everyone else, that they're couch potatoes during football season, sitting at home on the couch or on the recliner or whatever, watching games. And I have a big screen, but sometimes I'll have another iPad out, or even have my computer out watching games. And you guys that are married can appreciate this. My wife has approved me getting a couple of more TVs in our living room and like mounting them on the wall, so I'll be able to go 3 screens at once and still certainly have other things available. So that's exciting. I'm really super pumped for that to happening in the Jason Ray Sports Palace this upcoming week, and certainly ahead of football. So yeah, so like I said, make sure join Mark every 11. Make sure you hit that. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell so you know if we have to change or have to make any kind of last minute adjustments. And make sure you follow me on X at JasonRay1, or if you prefer Twitter, either way, whatever you want to call it. I got into a little bit of a debate this week with Kelly Maxwell and some of the OSU guys riled up a little bit, but it's all in good fun. So we'll have a lot of stuff come football season here, and everything like that. So yeah, make sure you bring that in, and we will talk about that. Oh, and one last thing, Doyle. Thanks for the comment, Jaden Nickens. Yes, tomorrow. Look at. I think he will be a big time commitment for Oklahoma in the 25 cycle. Big time receiver, and Oklahoma just continues to do really, really well. Emmett Jones is doing a phenomenal job recruiting that position. So absolutely, thanks for that mention there, Doyle. So anyway, like I said, everybody, thanks for joining. I think we had almost 40 in here simultaneously at one time. So I appreciate you guys jumping on here on a Friday afternoon. Hope you guys all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Boomer Sooner, and God bless.